Welcome to Go Learning Point tutorial. So in this session we'll talk about what are the differences we have between analytical functions and aggregate functions in Oracle. So as we already know that aggregate functions like minimum, maximum and sum basically used to perform aggregation on the columns that we have passed inside the aggregate functions, and the Oracle is going to execute that aggregate function and going to return a single summary record for that particular column. But what happens in analytical function, case of analytical function, it is also an aggregated results. It is also provide the aggregated results, but what analytical function is going to do will return the same number of rows as inputs. So like aggregate functions, analytical functions also return aggregate results, but analytics do not group the result set. That is going to return the same number of rows we have passed as an input inside the analytical functions. So let's try to understand these differences in detail. So first of all, we'll talk about aggregate functions. So the aggregate function is going to return an aggregated result or a single summary record for the value we have passed inside that function. So suppose we are doing select max and salary column from employee, it is going to return the maximum salary from that particular table. So that will be a single record, right? If you want to get the total the sum of salary column from a table, so I'll be doing select sum, and inside the sum function I'll be passing salary column from table. That is also going to return me a single record. So basically aggregate function will return a single summary record. So aggregate function returns a single result row based on the group of rows. Now these functions, the aggregate functions, we can use in the select statement. We can also use them in the order by clause and the having clause as well. Okay, so these functions can be used in the select statement as a list and in the order by clause and the having clause. Okay, so like if I want to if you want to get the number of records from a table, the number of duplicate records from a table, or if you want to get let's say that for example I want to get the number of if I have 5 different departments and I want to get that which are the department are having more than 5 employees, so in which department the employees are working and their count is more than 5. So this here I can use an aggregate function that when I calculating a count from that table, I can just put a count, that particular count is greater than 5 in the having clause. So basically the aggregate functions are going to be used with group by and having clause. So aggregate functions are commonly used with group by and the having clause. So let's say suppose you want to get the total number of salary an organization is paying to the employees, so I'll be doing select some salary from the complete table, and I'll not be using any where condition or anything, any group by or anything, any clause. Okay, so that is going to return a summary record that total salary the organization is paying to their employee. But suppose let's say if I want to get the total salary the organization is paying to each of the department, so in that case I'll have to use group by. So I'll be doing a group by department name, and then I'll be using the aggregate function, the sum salary. So if I use select sum salary from my table name, uh, group by the department name, I'll get the summary record for each of the department, right? So Oracle applies an aggregate function to each group. When I say each group, that means each group of the department, and it will aggregate and will return a single result for each of the department, that is the total number of salary the organization is paying to that department. So what does it mean? So if you, without using a group by, the Oracle is going to apply that aggregate function to all the rows. But if you use group by, then Oracle is going to apply that aggregate function for each of the group, whatever the column name we have given in the group by clause, right? So if you omit the group by clause, Oracle applies aggregate function in the select list to all the rows. So in case select some salary from employee, that aggregate function is going to get applies to all of the rows in that table. If we are doing the group by department name, then Oracle applies that aggregate function for each of the department. Now out of this group, the group by department name, and whatever the result you have got from the Oracle database, and if you want to filter further that out of this record, whatever the summary record we have for each of the department, whatever the salary we have, out of this you want to filter something else, like that the sum of salary in each of the department is greater than 20,000, then you can use having clause. So group by clause is basically group the rows based on the aggregate functions we have used, and if you want to further filter that the sum of salary in that particular group, you can use having clause. So we use aggregate function in having clause to eliminate groups, whatever the result we have got from Oracle by using group by clause, then you can further eliminate those groups using having clause. Now, because Oracle has to perform that that aggregate function on all the rows on that table, or on the rows, whatever the group you have given in that particular query. So these kind of operations, these kind of aggregate functions are costlier. So we have to use them properly. Okay. So these analytical aggregate functions are slower than analytical functions. Now let's talk about the analytical functions and how they work in Oracle. Now these functions are going to return the same number of results as input. So if I have passed 10 records, if I have 10 records in my table, and if I'm using analytical function that query, so that analytical function is also going to return me 10 number of records. Now in analytical functions, we make use of a window clause. So this window clause is basically the set of rows I'm going to perform that function. Okay, so the group of rows on which I'm going to perform that particular function is called as a window. Okay, and that is something we define in our analytical query. And those set of rows inside that window clause comes under that window clause. So the window clause basically determines the range and set of rows I'm going to perform that particular actions and that particular operations and the calculations. Now we already talked about the sequencing of how SQL query gets executed in Oracle, and these analytical functions are basically the last part of my query that is going to get executed, and not actually last, the second last, and the last would be always order by clause. So whenever we are trying to use any analytical function in our SQL, that then Oracle is going to execute all the things, the select, group by, having, where, and all the joins before this analytical calculation. And then after all this, my analytical function is going to get executed, and then last would be my order by clause. Okay, so analytical functions are the last set of operations performed in a query except for the final order by clause. So everything, where, join, having group by everything will be performed before the analytical functions. And these functions are basically faster than the aggregate functions because Oracle needs not to aggregate the results. Instead, the Oracle is going to return the same number of rows as inputs. So generally, these are faster than aggregate functions. So these are some points we need to keep in mind while using aggregate and analytical functions. Now, to understand this practically, you can go to my blogger site and you can go to the home page and you can find this topic, the analytical functions versus aggregate. And to understand this with some more examples, you can go to this link and you'll find this also in the same home page. So this is my home page. You just need to go down and the topics you'll find here, difference between analytical and aggregate function. You can just open it and just the next topic you'll find with the more examples I have written for analytical and aggregate functions. So this is the first link where you'll find all the differences between analytical and aggregate functions with examples of some table, and then you can just go through this link and you'll find some more examples of using these analytical and aggregate functions. So I'm gonna paste all these things to video description link and you can just copy it from there. You can just go through all the topics I have inside my blog and you can just go through this tutorial. So thanks for watching my tutorial, and like, share and subscribe to my channel to get more updates.